The past is filled with carefully documented events, yet some discoveries continue to resist clear interpretation despite decades of research. Their enduring uncertainty has shaped debates among historians and archaeologists alike. Marble corridors once echoed with the measured footsteps of senators, soldiers, and servants inside the vast imperial palaces overlooking the Palatine Hill. Bronze lamps cast flickering light across polished floors, while richly painted walls reflected the immense authority of Rome's ruling family. Beyond the palace windows, the forum stretched toward the horizon, crowded with citizens who rarely glimpsed the man whose decisions shaped every corner of the empire. It was a world built on ceremony, power, and carefully maintained appearances. Yet, behind those imposing walls lived one of history's most debated rulers, Emperor Caligula. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus in AD 12, he entered public life surrounded by admiration. His father, the celebrated General Germanicus, was widely respected by Rome's armies and beloved by ordinary citizens. As a child, Gaius accompanied military campaigns along the Rhine, wearing a miniature soldier's uniform complete with small military boots. The troops affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, meaning Little Boot. Although the name would follow him throughout history, ancient writers suggest he personally disliked it. His early years, however, unfolded under a cloud of tragedy. Germanicus died suddenly while campaigning in the eastern provinces, and rumors of poisoning spread almost immediately. Whether illness or political intrigue claimed his life remains uncertain, but suspicion poisoned the imperial family for years afterward. Caligula's mother, Agrippina the Elder, later fell into conflict with Emperor Tiberius, leading to exile, imprisonment, and the deaths of several close relatives. Surrounded by betrayal, executions, and shifting alliances, the young prince learned that survival inside the imperial household depended as much upon silence as ambition. When Tiberius died in AD 37, Caligula inherited an empire eager for change. Contemporary accounts describe celebrations throughout Rome. After years of increasingly isolated rule under Tiberius, many believed the charismatic young emperor represented renewal. During his first months in power, Caligula granted bonuses to soldiers, restored public games, and recalled political exiles. Ancient historians even describe widespread optimism that a prosperous new chapter had begun. Then, something appeared to change. Several ancient sources report that Caligula suffered a severe illness only months after becoming emperor. The exact nature of this sickness has never been established. Some historians suggest encephalitis, epilepsy, or another neurological condition. Others argue that no physical illness can fully explain the dramatic transformation described by later writers. After recovering, accounts portray him as increasingly suspicious, unpredictable, and severe toward perceived rivals. But how much of this portrait reflects reality? Nearly every surviving description of Caligula comes from authors writing after his assassination, including Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Josephus. None witnessed every event firsthand, and each wrote during later political climates that often rewarded criticism of disgraced emperors. Roman historians frequently emphasized moral lessons, sometimes blending verified events with dramatic storytelling. Separating historical fact from political propaganda has therefore become one of the greatest challenges in understanding Caligula's reign. Among the most famous stories is the claim that Caligula intended to appoint his horse, Incitatus, as consul. The tale has become one of history's defining symbols of madness. Yet, modern scholars increasingly question whether the story was ever meant literally. Some suggest it functioned as political satire, illustrating Caligula's contempt for the Roman Senate rather than documenting an actual appointment. If so, the legend may reveal more about his relationship with Rome's elite than about his mental state. Other accounts describe extravagant construction projects, enormous floating pleasure ships on Lake Nemi, lavish public spectacles, and ceremonies that blurred the boundary between emperor and deity. Archaeological discoveries, including the remains of the remarkable Nemi ships recovered centuries later, confirm that at least some reports of extraordinary engineering were grounded in reality. Yet, even here, the line between documented achievement and embellished reputation remains difficult to define. As Caligula's behavior grew increasingly controversial, tensions with influential senators deepened. Was he truly descending into instability, or was he deliberately dismantling traditional political norms to reinforce absolute authority? The surviving evidence supports multiple interpretations, and each depends upon sources whose reliability continues to be debated. More than 2,000 years later, the emperor known as Caligula remains suspended between history, reputation, and legend, leaving one enduring question unresolved. Who was the real man behind Rome's most controversial throne? From monuments that seem to speak with the rising sun, we now turn to a place where the earth preserved a far more unsettling silence. Here, no inscriptions tell the story. No ancient author recorded every detail, and no monument announces what happened. Instead, the evidence rests in the careful arrangement of human remains, waiting for archaeology to reconstruct a forgotten episode of the Viking Age. On the rolling chalk hills of Dorset in southern England, the landscape appears calm and timeless. Fields ripple gently with the wind, narrow country roads weave between farms, and distant hedgerows soften the horizon. Few travelers would suspect that beneath this peaceful countryside lay one of Britain's most disturbing archaeological discoveries. It was only during construction work near Ridgeway Hill in 2009 that excavators uncovered a mass grave unlike any previously found in the region. Inside the pit were the skeletons of more than 50 men. Their skulls were missing. Nearby, archaeologists discovered the severed heads carefully deposited in a separate area. Rather than being scattered randomly, the remains appeared intentionally arranged. The bodies had been placed together in a compact grave, while the skulls rested apart, suggesting that whoever carried out the burials followed a deliberate process. The scene immediately raised difficult questions. Were these victims of war, condemned prisoners, or participants in an event that had never entered the historical record? Detailed forensic examination began to reveal part of the story. The skeletons belonged almost entirely to young adult males. Their bones showed signs of exceptional physical strength developed through years of demanding activity. Healed fractures, worn joints, and powerful muscle attachments indicated lives spent performing strenuous labor or military service. These were not ordinary villagers. Everything about their remains suggested experienced fighters accustomed to hardship. The injuries surrounding their deaths proved even more revealing. Sharp cut marks across the neck vertebrae confirmed that each man had been beheaded. In many cases, several blows were required before the head was fully separated from the body. Some cuts struck the jaw or shoulders before reaching the spine, implying that the executions were neither swift nor perfectly controlled. The evidence suggests a grim sequence carried out one individual at a time. But who were these men? Radiocarbon dating placed their deaths between the late 10th and early 11th centuries, during a period when Viking raids frequently targeted the English coast. Scientists then turned to isotope analysis, examining chemical signatures preserved within the victim's teeth. Those signatures reflected the water and food consumed during childhood, revealing that many of the individuals had grown up not in southern England, but in Scandinavia and neighboring northern regions. Additional clues strengthened this conclusion. Several skulls displayed distinctive filed front teeth, with carefully carved horizontal grooves running across the enamel. Similar dental modifications have been identified in Viking burials elsewhere in northern Europe. Their exact purpose remains uncertain. They may have signified status, military identity, personal achievement, or cultural tradition. No surviving written source explains the practice, leaving archaeologists to interpret evidence preserved only in bone. The leading explanation is that these were Viking raiders captured after a failed expedition. During this era, England experienced repeated attacks by Scandinavian forces seeking wealth, territory, and influence. Captured warriors could face execution as both punishment and public warning. The Ridgeway Hill burial fits many elements of that broader historical setting. Yet, certainty remains elusive. No contemporary chronicle clearly records the execution of such a large group in Dorset. Historians have explored possible connections with King Athelred II and the turbulent conflicts that marked his reign, including the violence surrounding the St. Brice's Day massacre in AD 1002. However, the archaeological evidence does not perfectly align with any known written account. The grave exists almost independently of history's surviving documents. Some researchers have therefore explored alternative possibilities. Could these men have been mercenaries whose loyalties shifted during regional struggles? Were they intercepted before launching a raid, or betrayed after reaching English shores? Others have even noted the surprisingly careful burial itself. Although executed, the victims were not simply abandoned. Their bodies and heads were gathered and buried with a degree of order that remains difficult to explain. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in the contrast between the violence of their deaths and the silence that followed. More than 1,000 years passed before their grave was disturbed, preserving a moment that written history barely acknowledges. Today, the winds still sweep across the Dorset Hills much as they did centuries ago. But beneath that quiet landscape rests an unanswered question. Whose story was buried here, and how many similar chapters remain concealed beneath the ground, waiting for discovery? Just as the Dorset hillside preserved silent testimony within the earth, another enduring puzzle emerged from towering stone figures standing thousands of miles away along the Nile. Here, history offers no mass grave or battlefield, but something equally compelling, a monument that, according to generations of witnesses, appeared to greet each dawn with a voice of its own. On the west bank of the Nile near modern Luxor, two immense seated statues rise above the surrounding plain, their weathered faces turned toward the eastern horizon, where the sun first appears each morning. Known today as the Colossi of Memnon, these monumental figures have stood for more than 3 millennia, each carved from enormous blocks of quartzite weighing hundreds of tons. Originally erected during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III in the 14th century BC, they once guarded the entrance to a vast mortuary temple that ranked among the grandest structures of ancient Egypt. Although the temple itself gradually disappeared through floods, earthquakes, and the relentless passage of time, the colossal statues endured. For centuries, however, travelers came not simply to admire their scale. They came to listen. Ancient writers recorded an extraordinary phenomenon that began after a devastating earthquake struck the region in 27 BC. The northern statue suffered extensive damage, developing large cracks throughout its upper structure. Then, according to numerous eyewitnesses, something unexpected began to happen. At sunrise, as the cool desert air gave way to the warmth of the morning light, the damaged colossus occasionally emitted a brief sound. Descriptions varied from one observer to another. Some compared it to the clear vibration of a bronze string. Others heard a soft metallic ring, a short musical note, or the distant twang of a lyre. The sound was never prolonged, nor did it occur throughout the day. It appeared almost exclusively during the first moments after sunrise, lending the event an air of remarkable consistency. Could a monument carved from solid stone truly produce such sounds? Remarkably, the reports came from individuals whose writings are generally regarded as reliable historical sources. The Greek geographer Strabo described witnessing the phenomenon during his travels, while later visitors, including Roman officials and members of the imperial family, left inscriptions carved directly onto the statue itself, recording the dates on which they heard the famous sound. These ancient graffiti remain visible today, offering tangible evidence that belief in the phenomenon extended across generations, rather than arising from a single isolated account. As Greek influence spread through Egypt, the statues became associated not with Amenhotep III, but with Memnon, the legendary Ethiopian king who fought in the Trojan War. According to Greek mythology, Memnon was the son of Eos, the goddess of dawn. His supposed greeting to his divine mother at sunrise provided an elegant explanation for the strange acoustic event, transforming the damaged monument into a destination for pilgrims hoping to witness a moment that seemed to unite myth and reality. Modern researchers have approached the mystery from a different perspective. The leading scientific explanation suggests that the earthquake-created fractures altered the statue's internal structure. During the cool desert nights, moisture may have collected within tiny cracks in the quartzite. As the first sunlight rapidly warmed the stone, expanding air and evaporating moisture could have generated subtle vibrations, producing brief, audible tones. Similar acoustic effects have been documented in certain rock formations under specific environmental conditions, making the theory both plausible and consistent with the historical timing of the phenomenon. Yet, even this explanation leaves unanswered questions. Not every damaged monument produces musical sounds. Ancient descriptions differ in both volume and character, raising the possibility that atmospheric conditions played a significant role. Temperature, humidity, wind direction, and the gradual widening of cracks may all have influenced whether the sound appeared on any given morning. Because the phenomenon ceased centuries ago, modern researchers cannot observe it directly or recreate the exact structural conditions that once existed. Another possibility has occasionally entered scholarly discussion, though with far less supporting evidence. Some have wondered whether the original architects possessed an understanding of stone resonance that has not been fully appreciated. Could certain design features have unintentionally amplified natural acoustic effects after the earthquake altered the monument's interior? Others view this idea as unlikely, arguing that the timing of the sounds strongly indicates accidental damage rather than deliberate engineering. No archaeological evidence has confirmed that the builders intended the statues to function as acoustic monuments. The most revealing clue may be what happened next. Around AD 199, the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus ordered the damaged statue to be restored. Missing sections were rebuilt, cracks were filled, and new stone blocks reinforced the ancient structure. Following the restoration, reports of the dawn sound disappeared almost entirely. If the fractures had created a unique natural resonance, their repair may have silenced the monument forever. Today, the Colossi of Memnon continue to overlook the Nile in complete silence, their immense forms illuminated by the same sunrise that once drew emperors, scholars, and pilgrims from distant lands. The voices reported by ancient witnesses have faded into history, preserved only through inscriptions and written accounts. Yet the question remains remarkably resilient. Did countless observers simply experience an unusual interaction between stone, moisture, and morning light? Or did the damaged colossus briefly reveal an acoustic property that modern science has never been able to fully reproduce? The statues no longer answer, leaving only their enduring presence and the quiet anticipation of what other forgotten phenomena history may still conceal. From monuments that appeared to speak at sunrise, our journey now turns to walls that have remained silent for nearly 10,000 years. They stand not as towering statues or royal memorials, but as weathered stones whose true purpose continues to invite careful debate. Their builders left no written records, no inscriptions, and no explanation, only architecture that seems remarkably advanced for its time. In the fertile Jordan Valley, near the modern city of Jericho in Palestine, rises the ancient mound known as Tel es-Sultan. At first glance, it resembles little more than a broad hill of layered earth, shaped by countless generations of human occupation. Yet every layer represents another chapter in one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlements. Beneath the dust lie the remains of communities whose origins reach back to around 9000 BC, long before metal tools, organized kingdoms, or written language transformed human society. Among the site's most remarkable discoveries are its massive stone walls and an imposing circular tower, structures that have fascinated archaeologists for decades. Built during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, these constructions rank among the earliest known examples of large-scale stone architecture anywhere in the world. The wall itself once stretched around part of the settlement, while the adjacent tower rose nearly 8 meters high, connected to an internal staircase carefully built from dressed stone. The achievement is extraordinary when viewed in its historical context. The people who constructed these defenses, or perhaps something entirely different, lived during an era when agriculture was still developing and permanent settlements were only beginning to emerge. Without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or domesticated draft animals, they quarried, transported, and assembled thousands of heavy stones with remarkable precision. The labor required would have demanded careful planning, shared resources, and a level of social organization once thought impossible for communities of this age. The obvious question soon follows: why were these enormous structures built? For much of the 20th century, archaeologists interpreted the wall as one of humanity's earliest fortifications. Jericho's growing population may have required protection from rival groups competing for fertile land and access to the nearby spring that supplied fresh water throughout the year. In this view, the walls represent one of the earliest expressions of organized defense, suggesting that conflict accompanied the birth of settled civilization. Yet, not everyone agrees. Excavations have produced surprisingly little direct evidence of large-scale warfare from the period when the walls were first constructed. There are few signs of prolonged siege, widespread destruction, or weapons that would clearly support the image of a heavily fortified settlement. If hostile attacks were relatively uncommon, why invest such enormous effort in building defensive barriers? An alternative explanation shifts attention away from warfare and toward nature itself. Jericho sits near seasonal watercourses capable of producing destructive flash floods after periods of heavy rainfall. Some researchers suggest that the stone wall functioned primarily as flood protection, shielding homes from rushing water and controlling erosion around the settlement. Under this interpretation, the impressive engineering reflects environmental adaptation rather than military necessity. The circular tower may likewise have supported flood management or served as an elevated observation point over the surrounding landscape. Other discoveries have inspired even broader interpretations. The staircase inside the tower aligns closely with the setting sun during the summer solstice when viewed from certain positions. This observation has led some archaeologists to wonder whether the structure possessed ceremonial or astronomical significance alongside any practical function. Was the tower used to mark seasonal changes important for early farming communities? Did it serve as a gathering place where rituals accompanied the annual movement of the sun? While the alignment appears noteworthy, researchers continue to debate whether it was intentional or simply coincidental. More speculative ideas occasionally extend further, proposing that the walls formed part of a symbolic landscape expressing social identity, communal cooperation, or religious belief. In these interpretations, the project itself may have mattered as much as the finished construction. Building such monumental architecture could have strengthened social bonds, demonstrated leadership, or united scattered families around a shared purpose. Although difficult to verify, these theories remind us that ancient monuments often fulfilled several roles simultaneously rather than serving a single function. What remains beyond dispute is the remarkable sophistication displayed by es-Sultan's earliest inhabitants. The walls and tower challenge older assumptions about the capabilities of Neolithic societies, revealing communities capable of organizing complex engineering projects thousands of years before the rise of Egypt's Great Pyramids or the cities of Mesopotamia. Each excavation season continues to refine our understanding while also exposing new uncertainties buried within the layers of the ancient mound. Today, the weathered stones stand beneath the same desert sky that watched their construction nearly 10 millennia ago. They no longer enclose a thriving settlement, yet they continue to guard a question that has never been fully resolved. Were these walls raised against enemies, against nature, or in service of ideas that modern archaeology has only begun to recognize? The stones remain silent, leaving future discoveries to determine whether their greatest purpose still lies concealed beneath the earth. From the earliest stone walls at es-Sultan, our journey now crosses continents to another settlement that transformed a harsh landscape through remarkable ingenuity. Here, towering earthen buildings, carefully engineered water systems, and unexplained symbols tell the story of a thriving community whose influence extended far beyond its desert surroundings. Yet, despite decades of archaeological study, many aspects of its rise and decline remain uncertain. In the broad valleys of northern Mexico, surrounded by rugged mountains and stretches of arid grassland, lie the ruins of Paquimé, also known as Casas Grandes. At first glance, the site appears almost surreal. Thick earthen walls rise from the desert floor, outlining the remains of a settlement that once contained hundreds of interconnected rooms, ceremonial plazas, workshops, and sophisticated water channels. Although time has softened their edges, the structures still convey the scale and ambition of a community that flourished between approximately AD 1200 and 1450. Unlike many settlements built from stone, Paquimé relied primarily on adobe, sun-dried earth shaped into massive walls that provided insulation against both intense summer heat and cold winter nights. Multi-story buildings once dominated the settlement, connected by narrow passageways and carefully planned courtyards. Archaeological evidence suggests that some structures reached 4 or even 5 stories in height, making them among the most impressive examples of pre-Columbian adobe architecture in North America. The sophistication of the settlement extends far beyond its buildings. Excavations have revealed an elaborate network of canals designed to carry water throughout the city. Reservoirs, drainage systems, and carefully engineered channels indicate a deep understanding of hydraulic management in an environment where water determined survival. Such planning required not only engineering skill, but also coordinated leadership capable of organizing labor on a remarkable scale. Paquimé also occupied a strategic position within an extensive trade network. Artifacts recovered from the site include copper bells from western Mexico, marine shells carried from distant coastlines, turquoise, finely crafted ceramics, and the remains of scarlet macaws native to tropical regions hundreds of kilometers to the south. The presence of dedicated macaw breeding facilities has particularly intrigued researchers. These brilliantly colored birds held ceremonial importance throughout Mesoamerica, suggesting that Paquimé served as an important center linking cultures separated by vast distances. Yet, questions emerge almost as quickly as the discoveries themselves. How did such a sophisticated settlement develop in this remote desert landscape? The traditional explanation views Paquimé as the product of gradual local development, influenced by neighboring cultures. Over generations, communities expanded agricultural production, established trade relationships, and adapted architectural techniques suited to their environment. According to this interpretation, the city's impressive complexity reflects the steady evolution of regional societies rather than sudden outside intervention. Other researchers emphasize stronger cultural connections with civilizations farther south. Certain architectural features, ceremonial layouts, and ritual objects resemble traditions associated with central and western Mexico. Did merchants, religious specialists, or migrating families introduce new ideas that transformed the settlement? Or did similar solutions simply emerge independently among societies facing comparable environmental challenges? The archaeological evidence supports interaction, but the extent of that influence continues to be debated. Among the site's most intriguing features are its ceremonial mounds, unusual T-shaped doorways, and carefully designed ball courts. The ball game played here was more than recreation. Throughout much of ancient Mesoamerica, it carried political, religious, and symbolic significance. The existence of multiple courts at Paquimé suggests participation in traditions extending far beyond the surrounding desert. Yet precisely how those rituals were practiced remains uncertain, as no written records survive to explain their local meaning. Perhaps the greatest mystery concerns the city's decline. By the middle of the 15th century, Paquimé was largely abandoned. Many structures show evidence of extensive burning, leading some archaeologists to suggest violent conflict or internal unrest. Others point toward prolonged drought, environmental pressure, disruption of trade networks, or gradual economic decline. It is entirely possible that several factors combined over decades, weakening the settlement until its inhabitants dispersed to surrounding regions. Without contemporary written accounts, however, the precise sequence of events remains beyond complete reconstruction. More speculative theories occasionally propose that Paquimé functioned as the center of an unusually advanced cultural tradition whose influence has been underestimated. Others have suggested hidden ceremonial knowledge encoded within its architecture or astronomical alignments embedded in the city's design. While such ideas continue to attract attention, they remain difficult to verify and have not achieved broad archaeological consensus. Even after more than a century of excavation, Paquimé continues to challenge easy interpretation. Every excavated room, pottery fragment, and canal adds another piece to the puzzle while leaving larger questions unresolved. Standing among its weathered adobe walls today, surrounded by the quiet desert that once supported a thriving urban center, one cannot escape a lingering sense that the ruins still preserve chapters of their story beneath the dust. How much of Paquimé's true role in the ancient world has already been uncovered, and how much still waits beneath the earth for future generations to reveal? From the sun-baked adobe walls of Paquimé, our journey now shifts to a landscape at the opposite extreme. Here, there are no visible cities, no standing temples, and no surviving inscriptions. Instead, an immense sheet of ice conceals a continent whose geology remains only partly understood. In such an isolated environment, even ordinary landforms can appear extraordinary, giving rise to one of the most enduring modern historical mysteries. Antarctica is a world of silence. Endless fields of ice stretch toward distant mountain ranges, where jagged peaks rise through snow that has accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years. Temperatures routinely fall far below freezing, powerful winds reshape the surface, and much of the continent remains inaccessible for most of the year. Beneath this frozen landscape lie ancient rock formations, buried valleys, and entire mountain systems that modern technology has only recently begun to map. Among these features are several sharply pointed peaks that have become known in popular culture as the Antarctic pyramids. Photographs taken during scientific expeditions and satellite imagery have circulated widely, showing mountains with remarkably symmetrical sides and nearly triangular profiles. To many observers, the resemblance to pyramids is immediate. Their clean angles appear almost architectural, prompting speculation that they might represent something far more unusual than ordinary geology. Could such structures truly be artificial? The mainstream scientific explanation is both straightforward and supported by decades of geological research. Most experts identify these formations as examples of glacial horns, mountain peaks sculpted over immense spans of time by multiple glaciers eroding their surrounding slopes. Similar landforms can be found in the Alps, the Himalayas, and other mountain ranges shaped by repeated cycles of ice and weathering. Under the right conditions, erosion can produce surprisingly symmetrical faces and sharply defined summits that resemble carefully constructed monuments. The mountains associated with the so-called Antarctic pyramids belong primarily to ranges such as the Ellsworth Mountains, whose rocks long predate the arrival of modern ice sheets. Geological surveys indicate that these formations consist of natural bedrock uplifted through tectonic processes and gradually carved by glaciers over millions of years. From this perspective, their pyramid-like appearance reflects the remarkable ability of natural forces to create patterns that seem almost intentional. Yet the discussion rarely ends there. Because Antarctica remains one of the least explored continents on Earth, its vast ice sheet naturally encourages speculation. Radar surveys have revealed hidden mountain ranges, subglacial lakes, deep valleys, and landscapes sealed beneath kilometers of ice. These discoveries demonstrate that much of Antarctica's underlying terrain remains invisible to the human eye. Could unfamiliar geological features still await discovery beneath the ice? Almost certainly. Whether those features would resemble anything artificial is a very different question. More speculative theories propose that the pyramid-shaped mountains are remnants of an advanced prehistoric culture that existed before Antarctica became permanently ice-covered. Supporters of this idea often point to evidence showing that the continent experienced warmer climates many millions of years ago, when forests and diverse animal life flourished there. However, these ancient environments existed long before humans appeared. No credible archaeological evidence has identified human settlements, constructed monuments, or technological artifacts beneath the Antarctic ice. Other fringe interpretations suggest that satellite imagery reveals geometric structures too precise to be natural, or that governments have concealed significant discoveries from the public. Such claims have circulated widely online, yet they remain unsupported by verified geological or archaeological evidence. Scientific expeditions operating under the Antarctic Treaty continue to publish extensive research on the continent's geology, climate, and ice dynamics without producing findings that confirm these extraordinary proposals. Still, Antarctica possesses a unique ability to inspire curiosity. Its isolation limits direct observation. Most of what researchers know comes from satellite measurements, seismic imaging, ice-penetrating radar, and carefully planned expeditions. Each technological advance reveals another portion of a landscape that has remained largely inaccessible throughout recorded history. Even when discoveries prove entirely natural, they often reshape scientific understanding of the continent's complex geological past. Perhaps that is why the pyramid-shaped peaks continue to capture the imagination. They remind us that appearances alone can invite competing interpretations, especially in places where direct evidence is difficult to obtain. Nature is fully capable of producing forms that seem almost engineered, yet Antarctica's immense ice sheet also conceals countless features that have never been seen directly by human eyes. Standing before photographs of these angular mountains, it is easy to understand why they continue to provoke discussion. Whether viewed as remarkable examples of glacial erosion or as symbols of unanswered questions waiting beneath the ice, they occupy a place where science, observation, and human curiosity inevitably meet. As exploration of Antarctica continues, one question quietly remains. How many chapters of the continent's geological story are still locked beneath the ice, waiting for future generations to uncover? From the frozen peaks of Antarctica, where natural landscapes can appear almost architectural, we now arrive in the green valleys of southeastern Europe. Here, another series of hills has inspired decades of debate, not because they lie beneath ice, but because their remarkably regular shapes have led some to question whether nature alone could have formed them. Near the town of Visoko in central Bosnia and Herzegovina, a broad, forested hill rises above the surrounding countryside. Known traditionally as Visočica Hill, it has long overlooked a region rich in medieval history, ancient settlements, and archaeological remains. From certain angles, however, the hill appears unusually geometric. Its sloping sides seem to converge toward a pointed summit, creating a silhouette that closely resembles a massive pyramid. This striking appearance has transformed the landscape into one of the most debated archaeological sites of the 21st century. The discussion began in 2005 when researcher Semir Osmanagic proposed that Visočica and several neighboring hills were not natural formations, but enormous man-made pyramids constructed in remote prehistory. He named them the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Dragon, and several others, suggesting that together they formed an immense ceremonial complex unlike anything previously recognized in Europe. If true, the implications would be extraordinary. According to the proposal, these structures could predate the pyramids of Egypt by thousands of years, fundamentally changing accepted ideas about the origins of monumental architecture. Excavations soon began, drawing volunteers, researchers, and curious visitors from around the world. Trenches exposed large stone slabs, underground passages, and carefully layered sediments that supporters argued represented evidence of artificial construction. Yet, from the very beginning, archaeologists remained deeply divided. The overwhelming consensus among professional geologists and archaeologists is that the Bosnian pyramids are natural hills shaped by millions of years of geological processes. Studies indicate that the apparent stone blocks consist primarily of naturally occurring sedimentary rock layers fractured along predictable lines. Weathering, tectonic activity, and erosion can produce remarkably regular surfaces, particularly in regions where sedimentary formations dominate the landscape. To many specialists, the pyramid-like appearance is an example of how the human mind naturally recognizes familiar patterns within nature. Similar triangular hills exist elsewhere in the world without requiring human construction. Still, the debate has continued. One reason lies beneath the hills themselves. Exploration has uncovered an extensive network of underground tunnels, chambers, and passageways extending beneath parts of the region. Some of these tunnels contain dry stone walls, ceramic fragments, and unusually large stone blocks. Supporters argue that the tunnel system demonstrates deliberate engineering connected to the proposed pyramids. They point to carefully arranged fill material and certain geometric features as evidence that at least portions of the passages were modified by human hands. Mainstream researchers offer a more cautious interpretation. Several studies suggest that many of the tunnels were created during relatively recent mining activities, or represent natural cavities that were later altered by people. The region possesses a long history of human occupation, stretching back thousands of years, making it entirely plausible that ancient communities reused or expanded existing underground spaces without constructing enormous pyramids above them. Another aspect of the mystery involves reported measurements taken within the tunnels and on the hills themselves. Various investigators have described unusual electromagnetic readings, subtle temperature variations, and exceptionally high concentrations of negatively charged air ions. Some interpret these observations as evidence of sophisticated ancient technology or unknown energy phenomena associated with the site. Scientific opinion, however, remains considerably more restrained. Environmental conditions inside enclosed underground passages often produce distinctive airflow, humidity, and electrical characteristics. Differences in geology, groundwater movement, and mineral composition can influence local measurements without requiring artificial explanations. While some reported observations deserve continued study, none have been widely accepted as evidence for advanced prehistoric engineering. Beyond the scientific debate lies another important question. Why has the Bosnian pyramid theory captured so much public attention? Part of its appeal may lie in the landscape itself. Standing at the base of Vysočika Hill, it is easy to understand why so many visitors pause to examine its symmetrical profile. The surrounding valley contains genuine archaeological treasures, including medieval fortifications and evidence of much older settlements. The region's authentic historical richness creates fertile ground for larger interpretations, encouraging people to wonder whether even greater discoveries remain concealed beneath the forested slopes. Nearly 2 decades after the idea first entered public discussion, the Bosnian pyramids continue to occupy an unusual place between archaeology, geology, and popular imagination. Excavations remain active, new claims periodically emerge, and researchers continue examining the site's complex natural formations and human history. Whether these hills represent remarkable geological coincidences enhanced by later human activity, or whether future discoveries will reveal something still unrecognized, remains an open question. As the forests continue to blanket the slopes of Visoko, they quietly remind us that some landscapes preserve not only traces of the past, but also debates that may continue for generations yet to come. From the debated hills of Bosnia, where questions about human construction and natural formation continue to collide, our journey now moves to an island landscape shaped by stone, ritual, and careful planning. Here, ancient builders did not leave behind towering pyramids, but they created a fortified settlement whose massive walls reveal a society capable of organization, defense, and adaptation long before written records described their world. On the northwestern coast of Sardinia, Italy, overlooking the rugged landscape near the Gulf of Asinara, lies the archaeological site of Monte Baranta. Surrounded by rocky terrain, Mediterranean vegetation, and distant views of the sea, the site appears at first like a natural extension of the landscape itself. Yet, among the stones are the remains of a remarkable prehistoric complex dating to the Copper Age, around the 3rd millennium BC. Unlike later Mediterranean civilizations known for monumental temples and written histories, the communities of prehistoric Sardinia left behind only fragments of their existence. Their settlements, tools, and stone structures provide clues about their daily lives, but their beliefs, social systems, and reasons for constructing certain monuments remain largely unknown. Monte Baranta stands as one of the most intriguing examples. The site contains a large defensive enclosure built from massive stone blocks, along with walls, terraces, and structures arranged across the hillside. Some sections of the fortification are formed from carefully placed stones that create a strong barrier around the settlement. The scale of the construction suggests a community willing to invest considerable effort into shaping its environment. But what required such protection? The traditional interpretation is that Monte Baranta served as a fortified village, designed to defend inhabitants and valuable resources from rival groups. During the Copper Age, communities across the Mediterranean experienced increasing competition over farmland, livestock, and trade routes. Settlements with strategic locations and defensive walls became more common, reflecting a world where cooperation and conflict existed side by side. However, the exact purpose of Monte Baranta remains difficult to define. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of domestic activity, including remains associated with habitation and daily life. Yet, the arrangement of the structures suggests that the site may have held functions beyond ordinary settlement. Certain areas appear carefully organized, raising questions about whether the complex also served ceremonial or communal purposes. One of the most fascinating features is the presence of a large circular stone structure sometimes interpreted as a ritual area. Its design and placement have encouraged speculation about gatherings, social ceremonies, or symbolic practices that may have connected the community. Without written records, however, the meaning behind these spaces can only be reconstructed through comparison with other prehistoric sites. Could Monte Baranta have been more than a place of residence? Some researchers believe the site reflects a period of increasing social complexity, when communities began developing stronger leadership structures and shared identities. The construction of large walls required cooperation among many individuals, suggesting that the inhabitants possessed methods for organizing labor and coordinating collective projects. Other interpretations are more cautious. A fortified settlement does not necessarily indicate a highly centralized society. Communities may have worked together temporarily when facing environmental challenges or external threats, without the presence of permanent political authority. The stones reveal what people built, but not always how they organized themselves to build it. The surrounding landscape adds another layer of interest. Sardinia is home to thousands of prehistoric stone monuments, including the famous nuraghi that appeared in later periods. These structures demonstrate a long tradition of monumental stone architecture on the island. Monte Baranta belongs to an earlier stage of this development, offering a glimpse into the foundations of Sardinia's later architectural achievements. Some have suggested that sites like Monte Baranta represent early experiments in sacred landscapes, where natural features, defensive structures, and communal spaces were combined into places with multiple meanings. While such ideas remain difficult to prove, they highlight the complexity of prehistoric societies often viewed too simply through the limited evidence they left behind. Today, the stones of Monte Baranta remain exposed beneath the Sardinian sky, weathered by thousands of years of wind and sunlight. They preserve the memory of a community that understood stone, landscape, and cooperation in ways that modern archaeology is still working to understand. Were these walls built mainly for protection, for ceremony, or for a purpose that has not yet been recognized? As research continues, Monte Baranta remains a quiet reminder that even the oldest stones can still hold unanswered stories waiting to be uncovered. From the stone defenses of Monte Baranta, where prehistoric communities shaped their world through walls and carefully arranged spaces, our journey now moves eastward to another landscape marked by ancient stone construction. Here, scattered platforms of carefully placed rock preserve traces of human activity from a distant era, raising questions about the communities who built them and the purposes they served. In the foothills of the Margala Hills near Taxila, in present-day Pakistan, lies Dharamrajika, a landscape known today for its important archaeological remains. The region has long been recognized as a crossroads of cultures, where routes connecting Central Asia, South Asia, and the ancient kingdoms of the Indus region brought together different traditions, technologies, and beliefs. Among these layers of history are stone platforms and architectural remains that continue to attract archaeological interest. The wider Dharamrajika site is best known for its Buddhist stupa complex, established during the reign of Emperor Ashoka in the 3rd century BC. However, beneath and around later structures lie traces of earlier human activity, including stone arrangements and platforms whose origins and functions are less clearly understood. These features belong to a landscape that experienced repeated transformation over thousands of years, with each generation building upon what came before. The earliest phases of occupation in the Taxila region extend deep into prehistory. Archaeological discoveries have revealed settlements, tools, and evidence of human adaptation stretching back thousands of years before the rise of historic kingdoms. Within this broader context, the stone platforms associated with Dharamrajika raise important questions about how early communities organized their spaces and interacted with the landscape. At first glance, these platforms appear simple. They consist of carefully positioned stones forming elevated areas or structural foundations. Unlike later monumental architecture with inscriptions explaining their purpose, these prehistoric constructions offer no written record. Their builders left behind only the physical evidence of their work. Stones arranged with intention, but without a clear explanation of their meaning. The most common interpretation is that such platforms served practical purposes. They may have supported early structures, provided stable foundations in uneven terrain, or created designated areas for communal activities. In regions where seasonal changes, flooding, and shifting ground conditions influenced settlement patterns, raised platforms could have offered important advantages. Yet their exact role remains debated. Could these elevated stone areas have held symbolic importance beyond their practical use? Across prehistoric societies, raised platforms often became associated with gathering spaces, rituals, or places where communities expressed shared identity. Elevated locations naturally attract attention, separating certain activities from ordinary daily life. While there is limited direct evidence proving a ceremonial function at Dharamrajika's earliest stone features, comparisons with other prehistoric sites suggest that practical and symbolic purposes were not always separate. The mystery becomes more complex because Dharamrajika exists within a landscape of continuous cultural change. The later Buddhist monuments built here transformed the area into a major religious center, and centuries of construction altered the original appearance of the site. Distinguishing the earliest human modifications from later additions remains one of the challenges facing archaeologists. Some researchers have explored whether these early stone features represent the beginnings of organized construction traditions that eventually developed into more sophisticated architectural forms. Others argue that they should be understood within the everyday needs of prehistoric communities rather than as evidence of large-scale social systems. Both perspectives reflect a broader challenge in archaeology, interpreting structures when the people who created them left no written explanations. The surrounding region provides important context. Taxila became one of the ancient world's most significant centers of learning, trade, and cultural exchange. Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian influences all shaped the region over time. Yet, beneath these later achievements lies a much older human story, one created by communities whose names and beliefs remain unknown. Today, the stones of Dharamrajika stand as quiet witnesses to these layers of occupation. They do not reveal a single clear narrative, but instead preserve fragments from different moments separated by thousands of years. Each stone platform represents a decision made by people adapting to their environment, organizing their communities and leaving behind evidence of their presence. Were these prehistoric foundations simply practical structures built for survival, or did they carry meanings that disappeared with the societies that created them? As archaeological research continues, Dharamrajika remains a reminder that even the most modest stone arrangements can preserve questions that time has never fully answered. From prehistoric stone platforms that preserve only fragments of forgotten lives, our journey now moves to an object created for a very different purpose, a fragile document designed to preserve the memory of rulers who shaped one of the world's earliest civilizations. Unlike monuments carved into mountains or buried beneath settlements, this artifact survives as a damaged piece of writing whose missing sections have left historians searching for answers. Inside the Egyptian Museum of Turin in Italy rests one of the most intriguing documents from ancient Egypt, the Turin King List. Written on delicate papyrus during the reign of Ramesses II's era, around the 13th century BC, this ancient record once contained a detailed list of Egyptian rulers arranged in chronological order. Today, however, it exists only as a collection of fragile fragments, carefully preserved behind protective glass. At first glance, the papyrus appears modest compared with the enormous temples and statues associated with Egypt's pharaohs. Yet, its importance is extraordinary. Unlike many royal inscriptions created to glorify individual rulers, the Turin King List appears to have been designed as a historical document, attempting to organize Egypt's long and complex royal tradition into a structured sequence. The discovery of the papyrus itself was almost as dramatic as the questions it created. In the early 19th century, Italian diplomat and explorer Bernardino Drovetti acquired the document during his travels in Egypt. When it arrived in Europe, the papyrus had already suffered severe damage. Fragments were broken apart, scattered, and partially lost. Scholars carefully reconstructed the remaining pieces, but large sections of the original text had disappeared forever. Despite its damaged condition, the surviving portions revealed something remarkable. The Turin King List recorded hundreds of names, including many rulers absent from other surviving sources. It provided information about minor kings, short-lived dynasties, and periods of Egyptian history that were previously difficult to reconstruct. In this sense, it functioned almost like an ancient archive, preserving details that monumental inscriptions often ignored. Yet, one aspect of the document continues to generate debate. Before listing the well-known dynasties of Egyptian history, the papyrus appears to include earlier rulers described in a way that differs from conventional royal records. Some interpretations suggest that these entries refer to kings who ruled before the traditionally recognized First Dynasty. Others believe the text may include symbolic or mythological figures connected with Egyptian religious traditions. This has led to ongoing questions about how ancient Egyptians understood their own past. Were these early names attempts to preserve memories of rulers from a distant prehistoric period? Were they symbolic references representing divine succession rather than human kings? Or did later scribes combine historical traditions, religious beliefs, and royal ideology into a single chronological record? Mainstream Egyptology generally views the earliest sections cautiously. Ancient Egyptian king lists often served political and religious purposes as much as historical ones. They were not modern history books. They reflected how Egyptians understood kingship, legitimacy, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. Earlier rulers may have represented sacred ancestors, idealized figures, or traditions passed down through generations. However, some researchers have suggested more speculative interpretations. They argue that the Turin King List could preserve traces of rulers whose reigns occurred before the accepted chronology of Egypt. Some have pointed to the unusually long periods assigned to certain early figures as evidence that ancient traditions remembered a distant age, unlike the historical dynastic era. These interpretations remain controversial, and most scholars consider the extended reigns symbolic rather than literal. The debate reveals something important about ancient records. They are not simply collections of facts waiting to be translated. They are reflections of the societies that created them. Every name, date, and sequence carries assumptions about power, memory, and identity. The Turin King List also raises broader questions about how much of the ancient world has been lost. Egypt's civilization lasted for thousands of years, yet countless documents, archives, and records disappeared through natural decay, conflict, and the passage of time. What survives represents only a fraction of what once existed. Today, the damaged papyrus remains one of the most valuable sources for understanding Egypt's royal past. Its fragments provide names, connections, and clues that continue to reshape historical research, while its missing sections preserve a silence that cannot be filled. Was the Turin king list simply an administrative record created by Egyptian scribes, or does it preserve memories of earlier traditions that have almost completely disappeared? As scholars continue examining its fragile fragments, the ancient document remains a reminder that history is often written not only through what survives, but also through the unanswered questions left behind. From the fragile fragments of the Turin king list, which preserve the memory of rulers through incomplete lines of ancient writing, our journey now returns to the monumental landscape of Egypt itself. Here, instead of a damaged document, we encounter a structure built from enormous stones, an unusual royal monument that challenges traditional expectations of what a pharaoh's final resting place should look like. On the edge of the Saqqara necropolis, south of modern Cairo, lies a remarkable structure known as the Mastaba of Shepseskaf. Unlike the towering pyramids that dominate Egypt's royal landscape, this monument appears almost understated. Its broad, rectangular form stretches across the desert, constructed from layers of limestone and surrounded by the remains of a complex that once reflected the authority of the final ruler of Egypt's fourth dynasty. Shepseskaf ruled Egypt for only a short period during the 25th century BC, following the reigns of some of the most powerful pharaohs in Egyptian history. He came after builders responsible for monuments such as the Great Pyramid of Giza, yet his own burial monument followed a dramatically different path. Instead of commissioning a traditional pyramid, Shepseskaf chose a massive mastaba-like structure with a unique shape that has puzzled researchers for generations. Why would a king, surrounded by a tradition of pyramid construction, abandon the form associated with divine kingship and royal eternity? The answer remains uncertain. The monument, sometimes called the Mastabat el-Pharaoun, meaning Pharaoh's Bench, was originally far more impressive than its weathered appearance suggests today. Ancient builders covered much of the structure with fine limestone casing, creating a polished exterior that would have reflected sunlight across the desert. Its unusual design resembled a large stone sarcophagus placed upon the landscape, emphasizing a connection between the monument and the eternal resting place of the ruler. The most widely accepted explanation is that Shepseskaf simply chose a different architectural expression of royal identity. A mastaba was not an ordinary tomb. It had a long history in Egyptian funerary traditions and was used by elite individuals and early rulers before the rise of pyramids. By returning to this form, Shepseskaf may have been emphasizing continuity with older traditions rather than rejecting the achievements of his predecessors. Yet the timing of this decision has encouraged deeper speculation. The Fourth Dynasty represented one of Egypt's greatest periods of monumental construction. The pyramids of Giza demonstrated extraordinary organization, engineering, and resources. When Shepseskaf selected a different design, some historians wondered whether political or economic pressures influenced his choice. Perhaps the enormous demands of previous pyramid projects had placed limits on future construction. Perhaps changing religious ideas affected how kings wished to be remembered. Archaeological evidence provides clues, but not complete answers. The mastaba complex includes elements typical of royal burial architecture, including a mortuary temple and associated structures designed for rituals honoring the deceased king. This indicates that Shepseskaf still followed essential traditions of pharaonic burial practice. His monument was not a rejection of royal ideology, but rather a different interpretation of how that ideology should be expressed. Some alternative theories have suggested that the unusual shape reflected a hidden symbolic meaning. Because the structure differs so dramatically from nearby pyramids, some have proposed that it represented a deliberate return to earlier concepts of kingship, or a response to religious changes occurring near the end of the Fourth Dynasty. While these ideas remain debated, they highlight how architecture often carried meanings beyond simple function. The mystery becomes even more interesting when considering Shepseskaf himself. Unlike famous pharaohs such as Khufu or Khafra, Shepseskaf left behind relatively few records. His reign appears to have been brief, and historians know little about his political achievements. Was he a ruler attempting to stabilize a changing kingdom? Did he inherit challenges after generations of massive construction projects? Or was his unusual monument part of a personal vision that reflected ideas known only to his own generation? The absence of clear answers has allowed the Mastaba to remain one of Egypt's quieter mysteries. It does not compete with the enormous scale of the pyramids, yet its very difference makes it significant. In a civilization where royal monuments often followed strict patterns, Shepseskaf created something unexpected. Today, the remains at Saqqara stand beneath the desert sun as a reminder that even the most powerful rulers sometimes chose paths that differed from tradition. The stones of his monument reveal a king who belonged to one of Egypt's most celebrated eras, yet whose final statement was unlike anything built before or after. Was the Mastaba of Shepseskaf simply a practical alternative to the pyramid, or does its unusual design preserve a deeper message about a changing age in Egyptian history? The answer remains uncertain, waiting among the silent stones of Saqqara. From the unusual final monument of Shepseskaf, where a pharaoh chose a different path for his eternal resting place, our journey now moves eastward toward Mesopotamia, a land of vast cities, royal inscriptions, and rulers whose lives were recorded on clay tablets. Yet, among the many figures preserved from Babylon's long history, one king remains surrounded by a question that archaeology has never fully answered. Where is his final resting place? Across the ancient landscape of Mesopotamia, few rulers left behind a more distinctive legacy than Nabonidus, the final king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. His reign, which lasted from 556 to 539 BC, unfolded during one of the most dramatic periods in the ancient Near East. He ruled from the legendary city of Babylon, a center of monumental architecture, scholarship, and religious tradition. But unlike many kings whose tombs or burial monuments have been identified, Nabonidus disappeared from the archaeological record after the fall of his empire. His tomb has never been found. The mystery begins with the king himself. Nabonidus was not a typical Babylonian ruler. Ancient texts portray him as deeply devoted to scholarship, restoration projects, and religious interests, particularly his connection to the moon god Sin. He spent years away from Babylon in the oasis city of Tema in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar to manage affairs in the capital. This unusual absence created political tensions and contributed to later portrayals of him as a distant and unconventional monarch. When the Persian king Cyrus the Great captured Babylon in 539 BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire came to an end. Unlike many defeated rulers of the ancient world, Nabonidus was not recorded as being executed. Some sources suggest he was sent away or given a position elsewhere under Persian authority. After that, references to his personal fate become scarce. But where was he buried? In ancient Mesopotamia, royal burials were important expressions of status and religious identity. Kings built temples, restored sacred places, and ensured that their names would survive through inscriptions. Yet, no confirmed burial chamber, royal crypt, or funerary monument has been connected to Nabonidus. This absence has created one of the more intriguing archaeological gaps from the late Babylonian period. One possibility is that his tomb lies somewhere within the ruins of Babylon itself. The city was enormous, and many areas remain difficult to excavate due to the complexity of the remains and later occupation. Royal structures may have existed beneath layers of rebuilding, destruction, and environmental change. If a burial chamber was constructed there, it may still remain undiscovered. Another possibility points toward Nabonidus's years in Tayma. Because the king spent such a significant period in Arabia, some researchers have suggested that he may have chosen this region for his final resting place. Archaeological discoveries at Tayma have confirmed its importance during his reign, revealing inscriptions and evidence of Babylonian influence. Could the ruler who spent years separated from his homeland have also chosen to be buried away from Babylon? The evidence, however, remains incomplete. No inscription directly identifies Nabonidus's tomb. No excavation has revealed a burial chamber containing objects that can be confidently linked to him. Without such evidence, every proposed location remains a possibility rather than a conclusion. The mystery has also attracted more speculative interpretations. Some have wondered whether Nabonidus intentionally concealed his burial location, perhaps following traditions connected with royal secrecy or religious beliefs. Others have suggested that political changes after Babylon's fall may have led to the destruction or deliberate removal of his final monument. These ideas remain difficult to confirm because the ancient sources preserve only fragments of information about his final years. What makes the search for Nabonidus especially fascinating is the contrast between his historical importance and archaeological absence. He ruled one of the ancient world's greatest empires, lived during a period of enormous political transformation, and influenced the religious and cultural landscape of Mesopotamia. Yet, the physical evidence of his final moments remains missing. Today, archaeologists continue studying Babylonian records, Persian accounts, and sites connected with Nabonidus's reign in the hope of uncovering new clues. Each discovery adds another piece to the complex story of a king who stood at the edge of a changing world. Somewhere beneath layers of soil, ruined architecture, or perhaps within a distant landscape far from Babylon, the remains of Nabonidus may still exist. His reign ended more than 2,500 years ago, but his final chapter remains unfinished. Was his tomb destroyed, overlooked, or simply waiting to be discovered? Until archaeology reveals the answer, the resting place of Babylon's last king remains one of the enduring questions left behind by the ancient world. From the unseen resting place of Nabonidus, where the absence of evidence has preserved a centuries-old question, our journey now moves across the world to a landscape where the evidence is far more visible. Here, human hands transformed cliffs and volcanic stone into homes, storage rooms, and gathering places, creating a settlement that remains one of the most remarkable examples of adaptation in North America. Deep within the rugged canyons of northern New Mexico lies Bandelier National Monument, a landscape of towering cliffs, narrow valleys, and volcanic formations shaped by ancient geological forces. Among these dramatic surroundings are the stone structures and cliff dwellings built by ancestral Pueblo communities more than 7 centuries ago. Carved into canyon walls and constructed from local materials, these remains preserve the story of a society that learned to thrive in an environment where water, agriculture, and shelter required careful planning. The heart of Bandelier's archaeological landscape is Frijoles Canyon, where homes, ceremonial spaces, and defensive structures are integrated into the natural rock formations. The cliffs themselves are composed of volcanic tuff, a soft stone created from compressed ash produced by ancient eruptions. Over generations, the ancestral Pueblo people carved rooms directly into these cliffs, expanding natural cavities and combining them with stone masonry structures built along the canyon floor. The result is a settlement that appears almost connected to the landscape itself. But why choose such a challenging location? The most accepted explanation focuses on adaptation. The canyon provided natural protection, access to building materials, and a unique environment where communities could manage limited resources. The surrounding mesas offered areas for agriculture, while the cliffs provided cooler interiors during hot summers and protection from harsh weather conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests that people began intensively occupying the Bandelier region around the 12th century AD. They cultivated crops such as maize, beans, and squash, developed complex social systems, and constructed multi-room villages that supported extended communities. The scale of these settlements indicates cooperation and careful organization rather than isolated family groups. Yet, the stone structures of Bandelier raise deeper questions about daily life. Many rooms appear surprisingly small by modern standards. Some were used as living spaces, while others served as storage areas or ceremonial locations. Circular underground structures known as kivas played an important role in ancestral Pueblo traditions, functioning as places for community gatherings, ceremonies, and social activities. Although archaeologists understand their general importance, the exact beliefs and rituals practiced inside these spaces remain partly unknown. The mystery is not only found in what remains, but also in what disappeared. By the 1500s, many ancestral Pueblo communities had moved away from Bandelier and surrounding regions. Archaeologists believe this transition resulted from a combination of environmental pressures, including prolonged drought, changing climate conditions, and increasing demands on local resources. Social changes and migration also likely played important roles. The people did not simply disappear. Their descendants continued to live throughout the American Southwest, preserving traditions connected to their ancestors. However, the reasons behind specific movements remain debated. Did environmental changes make farming increasingly difficult? Did population growth place pressure on available land? Or did shifting cultural and spiritual priorities encourage communities to seek new places to live? The archaeological record provides clues, but rarely a complete explanation. Some features of Bandelier have also inspired more speculative interpretations. The precision of certain stonework, the relationship between structures and surrounding cliffs, and the careful placement of ceremonial spaces have led some observers to wonder whether the builders possessed deeper knowledge of astronomy, landscape symbolism, or sacred geography. While many of these interpretations remain difficult to verify, they reflect the complexity of ancient societies whose worldviews cannot always be reconstructed from physical remains alone. Modern research continues to reveal new details through excavation, environmental studies, and advanced technologies that examine the landscape without disturbing it. Every wall, carved room, and fragment of pottery contributes to a larger understanding of the people who shaped this canyon. Today, the stone structures of Bandelier remain surrounded by the quiet beauty of the New Mexico wilderness. The canyon walls still hold the marks of countless hands that carved, built, and maintained these homes across generations. Yet, beneath the visible remains lies a deeper question about the choices made by those communities. Were these cliffs selected primarily for survival, protection, and resources, or did the landscape hold meanings that extended beyond everyday life? As researchers continue studying Bandelier's ancient structures, the canyon remains a place where stone, memory, and unanswered questions exist together, preserving traces of a world that still has more stories to reveal. From the cliff dwellings of Bandelier, where ancient communities shaped their homes directly into the landscape, our journey now moves to another prehistoric monument created from stone. Here, massive slabs were not carved into cliffs, but carefully arranged beneath the open sky, forming a chamber whose purpose has remained a subject of fascination for generations. In the quiet countryside near Trigueros in Huelva, southwestern Spain, stands the Dolmen of Soto, one of the most impressive megalithic monuments on the Iberian Peninsula. Hidden beneath a circular mound of earth for thousands of years, this ancient structure was rediscovered in the early 20th century, revealing a long stone corridor that leads deep into the heart of the monument. Built from enormous upright stones, some weighing several tons, it represents the remarkable abilities of communities that lived more than 5,000 years ago. The Dolmen of Soto dates to the Neolithic period, approximately between 3000 and 2500 BC, a time when farming societies were spreading across Europe and transforming the relationship between humans and the landscape. These communities left behind evidence of agriculture, permanent settlements, and monumental construction projects that required cooperation across generations. Yet, the true purpose of such monuments remains one of archaeology's enduring questions. At first glance, the Dolmen of Soto appears to be a burial structure, and this interpretation is strongly supported by archaeological evidence. Megalithic tombs across Europe were often used as collective burial places, where communities placed the remains of their ancestors within carefully constructed chambers. The design of the Dolmen of Soto follows this broader tradition, with a long passage leading toward a central chamber covered by a large mound. However, the monument contains details that suggest its role extended beyond simple burial. The structure is formed by more than 60 large stone slabs arranged to create a long gallery. Some of these stones are decorated with carvings, including symbols, geometric patterns, and markings whose meanings are not fully understood. These designs offer rare glimpses into the beliefs of prehistoric communities that left no written records explaining their intentions. What did these symbols represent? Were they expressions of personal identity, spiritual beliefs, ancestral memory, or connections with forces that shaped their world? Archaeologists approach these questions carefully because prehistoric symbols rarely provide direct explanations. Similar markings can carry different meanings depending on their context, and without written language from the builders themselves, interpretation remains challenging. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Dolmen of Soto is its relationship with sunlight. The entrance of the monument faces the east, allowing the first rays of the morning sun to enter the passage at certain times of the year. This alignment is common among many megalithic structures throughout Europe, where builders appear to have considered the movement of the sun when positioning their monuments. Some researchers believe these orientations reflected connections between death, renewal, and seasonal cycles. Others suggest that sunlight entering the chamber may have marked important moments in the agricultural calendar, helping communities track changes in seasons. While these interpretations are plausible, the exact intentions of the builders remain impossible to confirm. The construction itself raises another important question. How did prehistoric communities move and position such enormous stones without modern machinery? The answer likely involved collective labor, simple tools, wooden supports, and careful planning. Moving massive stones required not only physical effort but also social cooperation. The creation of a monument like the Dolmen of Soto suggests that these communities were capable of organizing large projects and sharing common beliefs powerful enough to unite many individuals. Some more speculative interpretations have proposed that megalithic monuments served as centers of forgotten knowledge or possessed meanings beyond what archaeology can currently explain. While such ideas remain outside mainstream research, they reflect the undeniable mystery surrounding structures built by people whose voices have disappeared from history. The monument also offers insight into how prehistoric societies viewed the relationship between the living and the dead. Rather than treating burial as a final separation, the builders of sites like Soto may have created places where ancestors remained connected to the community. The stones were not merely containers for remains. They formed spaces where memory, identity, and landscape became intertwined. Today, the Dolmen of Soto stands quietly beneath the Spanish landscape, its massive stones still arranged almost exactly as they were thousands of years ago. The hands that shaped them are long gone, and the voices that explained their purpose have disappeared, leaving only the monument itself as evidence. Was this ancient chamber built solely as a resting place for the dead, or did it serve a deeper role within the spiritual world of its creators? As researchers continue studying its stones, carvings, and celestial alignments, the Dolmen of Soto remains a silent witness to a prehistoric society whose beliefs are still waiting to be fully understood. From the Dolmen of Soto, where enormous stones formed a passage between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors, our journey now continues to another Neolithic monument shaped by the same desire to transform the landscape. Across the ancient fields of Britain, communities raised similar structures from stone and earth, leaving behind silent chambers whose original meanings remain only partially understood. Hidden among the rolling hills of Somerset in southwestern England lies stony Littleton Long Barrow, a prehistoric tomb that has stood for more than 5,000 years. Surrounded today by farmland and peaceful countryside, the monument appears modest compared with later stone structures. Yet, its carefully constructed interior reveals the extraordinary effort invested by early farming communities during the Neolithic period. Built around 3,500 BC, stony Littleton Long Barrow belongs to a tradition of chambered tombs found throughout Western Britain and parts of Atlantic Europe. These monuments were not simply piles of earth and stone. They were carefully engineered spaces designed to endure across generations, preserving the remains of ancestors and creating places where communities could interact with their shared past. The structure consists of a long earthen mound supported by large limestone slabs. Beneath the surface lies a narrow passage leading into several internal chambers. These chambers were created using massive upright stones arranged with precision, forming a complex interior hidden within the mound. The entrance passage directs visitors deep into the monument, creating a transition from the open landscape into a darker, enclosed space. For the people who built it, this journey may have held profound meaning. Archaeological evidence suggests that Stony Littleton was used for collective burial. Human remains discovered within the chambers indicate that multiple individuals were placed there over time, rather than a single person receiving an isolated burial. This practice reflects a worldview in which ancestors remained connected to the community, with the tomb acting as a place where generations were brought together. But the monument raises questions that archaeology cannot fully answer. Why did Neolithic communities dedicate enormous effort to constructing permanent burial chambers when their daily lives already demanded intense labor from farming, hunting, and survival? One explanation is that these monuments strengthened social bonds. Building a long barrow required cooperation between many individuals, encouraging communities to work toward a shared goal. The construction itself may have been as important as the finished monument, creating a sense of collective identity among people connected by ancestry and tradition. Another possibility involves the landscape itself. Many prehistoric monuments were positioned within carefully chosen locations, and Stony Littleton is no exception. Its placement within the surrounding hills may have reflected relationships between natural features, seasonal cycles, and ancestral beliefs. Although there is no written evidence explaining these choices, the repeated pattern of monument building across prehistoric Europe suggests that location carried symbolic importance. The interior design of the barrow adds another layer of fascination. The narrow passage, low ceilings, and enclosed chambers create a dramatic change from the outside world. Entering the monument today, visitors experience a gradual movement from sunlight into darkness, from open space into a confined environment shaped entirely by human hands. For the original builders, this physical transition may have represented more than architecture. It may have symbolized movement between different states of existence. Some researchers have suggested that chambered tombs functioned as ceremonial spaces, where communities performed rituals connected to death, memory, and renewal. Others believed their primary role was simply to protect ancestral remains. Both interpretations are possible, and the absence of written records means the exact experiences of those who entered the barrow thousands of years ago remain unknown. As with many prehistoric monuments, Stony Littleton has also attracted more speculative ideas. Some have proposed that these structures were designed around astronomical observations or encoded knowledge of natural cycles. While certain monuments do show deliberate alignments with the sun or seasons, evidence for hidden systems of knowledge at every site remains uncertain. The true significance may have been simpler, a physical place where people expressed their relationship with their ancestors and the world around them. Over time, the monument experienced changes. The stones were disturbed, parts of the structure were damaged, and the original mound was altered by centuries of exposure. Yet, enough survived to reveal the skill and dedication of its creators. Today, Stony Littleton Long Barrow remains a quiet presence in the Somerset landscape. Its stones have endured longer than the languages, traditions, and communities that built them. They preserve evidence of a society that viewed memory, ancestry, and place as deeply connected. Was this ancient chamber only a burial monument, or did it serve a wider purpose within the spiritual and social life of its builders? As researchers continue examining the surviving evidence, Stony Littleton remains a doorway into a world that left behind its stones, but very few explanations for what those stones truly meant. From the carefully arranged stones of Stony Littleton Long Barrow, where prehistoric communities created lasting monuments to memory and ancestry, our journey now moves to a very different kind of archaeological puzzle. Instead of chambers built by human hands, this mystery begins with a mark preserved directly in stone, a single impression that has inspired debate about the creatures and environments that existed long before modern times. In the Mpumalanga region of South Africa, near the town of Mpuluzi, a remarkable formation has attracted attention for decades. Carved into a surface of ancient granite is what appears to be an enormous footprint, far larger than that of any known human being. Measuring roughly more than a meter in length, the impression resembles the shape of a human foot, complete with a heel, rounded front section, and a suggestion of individual toe marks. Known popularly as the giant footprint of Mpuluzi, the formation has become one of the more unusual examples of natural features that challenge interpretation. Is it truly a footprint left by an unknown giant creature, or is it a remarkable geological formation that only resembles something familiar? The landscape surrounding the formation provides important context. Southern Africa is one of the world's richest regions for understanding prehistoric life. The rocks of this continent preserve evidence of ancient ecosystems, extinct animals, early human ancestors, and geological processes that stretch back millions of years. The granite formations found throughout the region were created through slow natural processes involving pressure, erosion, weathering, and the movement of minerals within the rock. From a geological perspective, the most widely accepted explanation is that the Mpuluzi feature is not a footprint at all, but a natural weathering phenomenon. Certain types of granite can develop cavities and patterns as softer minerals erode away faster than surrounding material. Over immense periods of time, these processes can create shapes that appear surprisingly similar to objects familiar to human observers, including faces, animals, and footprints. This phenomenon is known as pareidolia, the tendency of the human mind to recognize meaningful patterns within random forms. Yet, the size and appearance of the Mpuluzi impression have continued to inspire curiosity. Those who argue for a more unusual interpretation point to the shape itself. Unlike many random geological formations, the feature appears elongated and symmetrical, with a form that resembles the outline of a human foot. Some observers have questioned whether such a precise resemblance could occur naturally, while others have suggested that ancient humans may have modified the rock surface to create or enhance the shape. Could the formation represent something connected to ancient human activity? Archaeology has shown that humans have interacted with stone landscapes for thousands of years. Rock art, carved symbols, and modified surfaces are found throughout southern Africa, demonstrating that prehistoric communities sometimes transformed natural features for cultural or symbolic purposes. However, no reliable archaeological evidence has connected the Mpuluzi impression with deliberate human carving. The deeper question concerns age. If the feature were a genuine footprint, determining when it was created would be essential. The surrounding geology is extremely old, with some rock formations in the region dating back billions of years. However, the age of the rock itself does not automatically reveal the age of the impression. A natural cavity could have formed relatively recently compared with the surrounding stone, while a genuine track would require evidence showing that soft material once existed at the surface before becoming preserved. Fossil footprints are usually formed under very specific conditions. A track left in mud, volcanic ash, or another soft surface must be rapidly covered and protected from erosion. Over time, minerals replace or preserve the original shape. Such fossilized tracks are well documented in many parts of the world, including those made by dinosaurs, prehistoric mammals, and early human ancestors. The Mpuluzi feature lacks the geological characteristics normally associated with preserved footprints. Still, unusual natural formations often become linked with broader questions about Earth's past. The idea of unknown giants or forgotten creatures appearing in ancient landscapes has fascinated people for generations. Similar claims have emerged from oversized footprints reported around the world, though scientific investigations have generally found geological explanations or human-made alterations behind many of these examples. The fascination surrounding the Mpuluzi footprint may come from something deeper than the formation itself. A footprint is one of the most personal traces a living being can leave behind. Unlike a mountain or a fossilized bone, a footprint represents movement, a single moment when a creature passed through a landscape. It suggests presence, direction, and a connection between life and place. This symbolic power may explain why impressions resembling footprints capture such strong attention. The surrounding region adds another layer of interest. Southern Africa has produced some of the most important discoveries in human evolutionary research. Fossils from early hominins have transformed scientific understanding of human origins, revealing a complex story of adaptation stretching back millions of years. In a landscape already filled with evidence of ancient life, a giant, footprint-like formation naturally invites questions. Could there be a connection between the feature and forgotten aspects of the region's geological past? Or does the answer lie entirely within the remarkable abilities of natural forces to create familiar shapes from ordinary stone? Modern science continues to emphasize careful examination of evidence. Without clear geological data proving that the formation originated as a biological footprint, the most accepted explanation remains natural erosion and weathering. Yet, the feature continues to attract attention because it occupies a fascinating space between appearance and reality. Today, the giant footprint of Mpuluzi remains a quiet landmark surrounded by the landscapes of southern Africa. It does not provide a simple answer, but instead invites a broader reflection on how humans interpret the world around them. Some mysteries disappear when studied closely, while others remain fascinating because they reveal the limits of what we know. Whether shaped by ancient geological processes or representing something still misunderstood, the impression carved into the stone continues to raise the same enduring question. How many remarkable stories are written into the Earth's surface, waiting for us to learn how to read them? From the vast stone landscapes of southern Africa, Where a single mark in the rock invites questions about nature, time, and interpretation, our journey now moves across the Mediterranean Sea to an island shaped by another extraordinary relationship between humans and stone. Here, the mystery is not a single object, but a network of countless grooves carved into the landscape. Parallel tracks that stretch across hills, valleys, and ancient pathways, leaving behind a puzzle that has challenged researchers for generations. On the islands of Malta and Gozo, surrounded by the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean, lies one of the most unusual archaeological landscapes in Europe. The Maltese cart ruts. These mysterious channels appear across the islands, cut directly into the limestone terrain, forming complex networks that sometimes run for hundreds of meters before disappearing beneath soil, cliffs, or the sea. Known locally by various names, these features are among the most distinctive traces left behind by Malta's prehistoric inhabitants. Unlike temples, tombs, and stone monuments that clearly reveal human intention, the purpose of the cart ruts remains uncertain. They are physical marks across the landscape, yet the story behind their creation is still debated. The first impression is striking. Two parallel grooves, usually spaced at a similar distance apart, run side by side through the rock. In some locations, they intersect with other tracks, creating patterns that resemble an ancient transportation network. Some follow gentle slopes, while others cross difficult terrain, descend toward valleys, or approach coastal areas. In places such as Misragar il-Kabir near Dingley, the density of these tracks creates the appearance of an enormous prehistoric road system. But who created them and why? The most widely accepted explanation connects the cart ruts with ancient transportation. Archaeologists have suggested that they may have been formed by repeated movement of carts or sledges carrying heavy materials across the island. Over time, constant pressure from wooden wheels, stone rollers, or sledges could have gradually worn grooves into the soft Maltese limestone. This interpretation fits with the practical needs of prehistoric communities. Malta's megalithic builders transported enormous blocks of stone for monumental structures such as temples, some of the oldest freestanding stone buildings in the world. Moving heavy materials across the island would have required organized systems of transport, and the cart ruts may represent traces of these activities. However, this explanation does not answer every question. Some tracks appear in locations where transportation would have been difficult or inefficient. Others run along steep slopes, uneven surfaces, or areas where no obvious destination exists. In some places, the grooves continue toward the coastline and disappear into the sea, raising questions about whether the landscape itself has changed since they were created. Could rising sea levels have submerged parts of an ancient network? The Mediterranean has experienced significant changes over thousands of years, and Malta's coastline has shifted due to natural processes. Some researchers have suggested that certain cart ruts may once have extended farther across areas now covered by water. While this possibility is difficult to confirm, it adds another layer to the mystery surrounding these ancient pathways. Dating the cart ruts has also proven challenging. Unlike stone temples or burial chambers, the grooves themselves do not contain clear inscriptions, artifacts, or organic material that can provide precise dates. Some scholars associate them with the Bronze Age, while others believe certain tracks may be older, possibly connected with the Neolithic period when Malta's monumental culture was developing. The lack of direct evidence has allowed different interpretations to emerge. Some researchers argue that the cart ruts were created gradually through practical activity over generations. Rather than being a planned network, they may represent the accumulation of countless journeys made by ancient communities moving goods, stones, and resources. Others have suggested more symbolic possibilities. Throughout human history, pathways have carried meanings beyond transportation. Routes can connect sacred spaces, mark territories, or represent relationships between communities and their environment. Some observers have wondered whether certain Maltese cart ruts may have played ceremonial or social roles in addition to practical ones. These interpretations remain debated because the ancient builders left no written explanation of their intentions. The mystery becomes even more fascinating when considering the broader context of prehistoric Malta. Between approximately 3,600 and 2,500 BC, island communities constructed enormous stone temples without the use of metal tools or modern machinery. These achievements reveal advanced planning, cooperation, and a deep understanding of engineering. The cart ruts may belong to the same world of innovation and adaptation. They show a different side of prehistoric life, not monumental architecture, but the everyday movement required to sustain a society capable of building such extraordinary structures. The grooves may represent workers transporting materials, communities connecting settlements, or generations shaping the landscape through repeated activity. Yet their exact story remains incomplete. Some alternative theories have proposed that the cart ruts are far older than mainstream archaeology suggests, or that they represent evidence of a highly advanced prehistoric system. These ideas attract attention because the scale and complexity of the tracks seem unusual. However, without archaeological evidence supporting these claims, researchers continue to favor explanations based on known prehistoric technologies and environmental conditions. Today, the Maltese cart ruts remain scattered across the islands like fragments of an unfinished story. Weather, erosion, construction, and time have altered many sections, while others continue to preserve the marks of ancient movement. Standing beside these grooves, it is easy to imagine the countless journeys that once took place along them. The people who created these paths are gone, their voices lost, but their interaction with the landscape remains visible. Were the cart ruts simply practical tracks created by generations of transportation, or did they serve purposes that extended deeper into the beliefs and organization of prehistoric Malta? As researchers continue studying these unusual formations, the stone pathways of the islands remain a reminder that even the simplest marks on the earth can preserve questions that have survived for thousands of years. From the stone pathways of Malta, where ancient communities carved their movements directly into the landscape, our journey now turns toward the heart of northern China, where another prehistoric society transformed its environment on an extraordinary scale. Here, instead of scattered tracks across hillsides, an entire city emerged from stone, rising above the landscape as one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries of East Asia. On the edge of the Loess Plateau in northern China, near the modern city of Shenmu in Shanxi Province, lies the remains of Shimao, a massive, stone-walled settlement built more than 4,000 years ago. Surrounded by dry valleys, steep hills, and vast stretches of yellow earth, the site appears today as a quiet landscape. Yet, beneath the surface are the remains of a complex urban center that challenged previous assumptions about early Chinese civilization. Known as the Shimao Stone-Walled City, the settlement dates primarily to the late Neolithic period, around 2,300 to 1,800 BC. Before its discovery, many researchers believed that large-scale urban development in ancient China was concentrated farther east along the Yellow River Plains. Shimao changed that understanding, revealing that sophisticated societies also flourished in the northern frontier regions long before the rise of later dynasties. The scale of Shimao is immediately striking. The site covers an enormous area, with massive stone walls, terraces, defensive structures, and carefully planned spaces built across a hillside. Unlike many prehistoric settlements that relied mainly on earth and wood, Shimao was constructed largely from stone, a choice influenced by the local environment and the need for long-lasting protection. The outer walls stretched for kilometers, creating a fortified city capable of supporting a large population. Within these walls were residential areas, workshops, ritual spaces, and monumental structures that suggest a highly organized society. But what kind of society built such a place? The discovery of Shimao raised important questions about the development of early Chinese civilization. The city appeared centuries before many traditionally recognized centers of political power, suggesting that complex social organization existed in regions previously considered peripheral. Archaeologists believe Shimao was not simply a village that gradually expanded. Its planning indicates deliberate design. The construction of enormous stone defenses would have required coordinated labor, skilled builders, and leadership capable of organizing thousands of people. The purpose of those defenses remains one of the most interesting aspects of the site. The northern regions of ancient China experienced environmental pressures and competition between different communities. Stone walls may have protected inhabitants from conflict, but they may also have represented social status and political authority. Throughout human history, walls have served not only as barriers but also as symbols of power, separating communities and defining identities. Inside Shimao, archaeologists discovered features that reveal a more complex story. Among the most remarkable discoveries were numerous carved stone objects, including jade artifacts, pottery, and decorative pieces. Jade held deep cultural importance in ancient China and was often associated with status, ritual, and spiritual significance. The presence of large quantities of jade at Shimao suggests that the settlement participated in wider networks of exchange and possessed considerable influence. Perhaps even more intriguing were the carved stone fragments found embedded within the walls. Some appear to depict human-like faces and symbolic designs. Their exact meaning remains uncertain, but they suggest that artistic expression and ritual practices were deeply connected to the architecture itself. Were these carvings protective symbols, representations of ancestors, or expressions of beliefs that disappeared with the people who created them? Archaeologists continue examining these questions. Another unusual feature of Shimao is evidence of ritual activity. Researchers have discovered signs suggesting that certain areas may have been used for ceremonies, including remains interpreted as possible offerings. These findings indicate that the city was not merely an economic or defensive center, but also a place where social and spiritual traditions were practiced. However, the details of those traditions remain unclear. Without written records from the inhabitants, researchers must reconstruct their world through architecture, artifacts, and environmental evidence. Every discovery provides another clue, but the complete picture remains incomplete. The relationship between Shimao and later Chinese civilizations is another area of ongoing study. Some researchers have explored whether Shimao influenced the development of later political structures in ancient China. The city's size, organization, and material culture suggest that it belonged to a sophisticated society with its own traditions and systems of authority. Yet it remains uncertain how directly it connected with the cultures that later dominated the region. The decline of Shimao adds another layer of uncertainty. By around 1800 BC, the settlement appears to have lost its importance. Archaeologists continue debating the reasons behind this transformation. Environmental changes, shifts in trade networks, social conflicts, or the rise of new political centers may all have contributed. Like many prehistoric societies, the people of Shimao left behind evidence of their achievements, but few explanations for their decisions. Some more speculative interpretations have suggested that Shimao represents a civilization far more advanced than previously recognized, with connections to unknown cultures or forgotten traditions. While such ideas attract attention, archaeological evidence points toward a complex but human society shaped by its environment, resources, and historical circumstances. The true significance of Shimao may lie not in unanswered legends, but in what it reveals about human creativity and adaptation. The people who built this city transformed a challenging landscape into a center of activity through planning, cooperation, and technical skill. Their stone walls endured long after their society disappeared, preserving traces of a world that existed before many familiar chapters of Chinese history began. Today, the ruins of Shimao stand as a reminder that the ancient past is often far more diverse than expected. Beneath the quiet hills of northern China lies the outline of a city built by people whose names have been lost, but whose achievements remain visible. Was Shimao simply one of many early centers of power that emerged and declined, or does it represent a chapter of Chinese prehistory that has only recently begun to be understood? As excavation continues, the stone walls of this remarkable settlement continue to reveal new clues about a society that once stood at the edge of history, waiting to be discovered. Yet, the deeper researchers look into Shimao, the more complicated the picture becomes. The city was not simply a collection of walls and houses. Its architecture appears to reflect a society negotiating power, identity, belief, and survival in a demanding environment. The stone itself provides an important clue. Building with stone on such a scale required an enormous investment of labor. Large blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and positioned. Walls had to be maintained. Paths and terraces had to be planned around the natural contours of the hills. Such work could not have been accomplished casually or by isolated households. Someone had to coordinate it. That does not necessarily mean that Shimao was ruled by a king in the later sense of the word. Authority may have been distributed among religious leaders, influential families, military groups, or other forms of social leadership. The archaeological evidence does not provide a clear political structure, leaving researchers to reconstruct power from the physical arrangement of the settlement. And this is where the city becomes particularly revealing. Some areas appear more monumental than others. Certain spaces contain unusual objects or architectural features, while ordinary residential areas are more modest. Such differences may indicate social distinctions within the population. If so, Shimao could represent an important stage in the development of social hierarchy in northern China. The presence of jade adds another dimension. Jade was difficult to obtain and required considerable effort to shape and polish. Objects made from it were therefore unlikely to have been ordinary household possessions. Their presence within the settlement suggests that certain materials were associated with prestige, ritual, or authority. Perhaps jade objects were exchanged between powerful families. Perhaps they were used during ceremonies that reinforced social relationships. Or perhaps they served as markers of identity within a complex network of communities. There is no single interpretation that explains every artifact. The same uncertainty applies to the carved faces and decorative stones incorporated into the architecture. Their placement is particularly intriguing because these images were not necessarily created simply for private enjoyment. By embedding symbolic objects into major structures, the builders may have been giving the architecture a deeper meaning. The walls themselves could have become part of a visual language. To enter the settlement may have meant passing through a carefully controlled sequence of spaces, each communicating something about the community and its organization. Defensive architecture could therefore have served both practical and symbolic functions. A wall protects, but a wall also defines who belongs inside. That distinction may have mattered greatly at Shimao. As communities grew larger and competition for resources intensified, controlling access to valuable areas could have become increasingly important. The city may have functioned not only as a settlement, but also as a center where economic resources, political authority, and ritual life converged. Environmental evidence offers another perspective. The Loess Plateau has experienced significant climatic fluctuations over thousands of years. Changes in rainfall and vegetation could have affected agriculture, water availability, and population movement. A society capable of constructing enormous walls would still have remained dependent upon the natural systems surrounding it. Perhaps the eventual decline of Shimao was partly connected to those pressures, but environmental change alone may not explain everything. Large settlements can become vulnerable when the social systems supporting them begin to weaken. Trade routes shift. Political alliances change. Resources become contested. Populations move toward more favorable regions. A city that once represented stability can gradually lose its central role. Shimao may have experienced some combination of these processes. Its decline should therefore not necessarily be viewed as a sudden catastrophe. The archaeological record may instead reflect a gradual transformation, in which parts of the settlement were abandoned while other traditions continued elsewhere. This possibility connects Shimao to a much larger pattern in human history. Cities rise, flourish, and change. Their inhabitants often leave behind monuments that survive longer than the political systems that created them. Later societies may inherit fragments of earlier traditions without knowing their original meaning. From the massive stone walls of Shimao, where an early society created a fortified city long before many traditional centers of power emerged, our journey now moves deeper into the prehistoric landscapes of the Near East. Here, thousands of years before written records, communities began experimenting with architecture, symbolism, and social organization in ways that continue to challenge our understanding of humanity's earliest settlements. Along the banks of the Euphrates River in southeastern Turkey, beneath the waters of the modern reservoir created by the Ataturk Dam, once stood the remarkable archaeological site of Nevali Çori. Although much of the original settlement is now submerged, the discoveries made there transformed the way researchers view the transition from hunter-gatherer communities to more complex societies. Dating to approximately 8,400 to 8,100 BC, Nevali Çori belonged to the Neolithic period, a time when humans across the Near East were beginning to establish more permanent settlements, cultivate plants, and develop new forms of social organization. Yet, the site revealed something unexpected: monumental architecture and artistic traditions appearing at a surprisingly early stage of human history. Before discoveries like Nevali Çori, many researchers believed that large communal structures and sophisticated symbolic art developed only after agriculture and settled village life became firmly established. The remains of this settlement suggested a more complicated story. The most remarkable feature of Nevali Çori was its communal buildings, particularly structures containing large stone pillars placed within carefully designed rooms. These pillars were smaller than the enormous stones later found at nearby Göbekli Tepe, but they displayed similar characteristics, including carved human-like forms and symbolic imagery. These discoveries raised fundamental questions about the development of early societies. How did communities that were still transitioning away from a mobile lifestyle organize the labor required to create such structures? What motivated people thousands of years ago to gather, build, and decorate spaces that appear to have held special importance? The mainstream interpretation is that Nevali Çori was a ritual and communal center connected to the beliefs and social practices of early Neolithic communities. The buildings were not simply houses. Their unusual design, symbolic carvings, and carefully arranged interior spaces suggest that they served purposes beyond everyday domestic life. Archaeologists discovered several T-shaped limestone pillars, some decorated with carved images. These included representations of animals and abstract designs, offering rare insight into the symbolic world of people who left behind no written language. Among the carvings were depictions of creatures such as snakes and birds, along with human-like features. Their meanings remain uncertain, but they demonstrate that these communities possessed complex systems of symbolism and imagination. The absence of written records makes interpretation difficult. A carved animal could represent a spiritual belief, a clan symbol, a story, or something entirely different. Modern researchers can identify the images, but understanding the thoughts behind them requires careful comparison with other archaeological evidence. The discovery of Nevali Çori also changed perceptions about the relationship between agriculture and civilization. For much of the 20th century, scholars often viewed farming as the foundation that allowed humans to create villages, organize labor, and eventually develop complex societies. Nevali Çori, however, revealed that social cooperation and symbolic traditions may have appeared earlier and may have helped encourage the development of settled communities. Some researchers have suggested that shared rituals and communal gatherings played an important role in bringing people together before full agricultural systems were established. According to this view, the desire to create meaningful social spaces may have been one of the forces that encouraged humans to remain in one place. Other interpretations remain more cautious. While Nevali Çori demonstrates impressive organization, it does not necessarily indicate the existence of centralized rulers or a highly hierarchical society. The construction of communal buildings could have resulted from cooperation among groups connected by shared traditions, rather than from the authority of a powerful elite. The mystery becomes even deeper when considering the wider region. Nevali Çori was part of a larger cultural landscape in Upper Mesopotamia, where several early Neolithic settlements appeared during the same period. Sites such as Göbekli Tepe, Çayonu, and other nearby communities reveal that humans were experimenting with architecture, agriculture, and social identity in multiple ways. Together, these discoveries suggest that the origins of civilization were not a simple progression from primitive villages to cities. Instead, the process was far more complex, involving changing relationships between humans, nature, belief systems, and community organization. The disappearance of Nevali Çori adds another unanswered question. After centuries of occupation, the settlement was eventually abandoned. Archaeologists continue to investigate why communities left such places behind. Environmental changes, shifting resources, cultural transformations, or movement toward new settlements may have all contributed. Yet, the exact reasons remain uncertain. Some speculative theories have suggested that sites like Nevali Çori represent evidence of forgotten knowledge or unexplained influences that shaped early humanity. However, archaeological research generally points toward something equally fascinating: ordinary humans achieving extraordinary results through cooperation, creativity, and shared purpose. The significance of Nevali Çori does not come from impossible explanations, but from how much it reveals about human potential during a period once considered simple and undeveloped. These people created symbolic art, designed communal spaces, and organized large projects thousands of years before the rise of writing, kingdoms, or familiar historical civilizations. Their achievements force researchers to reconsider how early societies formed and what truly drove humanity toward complexity. Today, much of Nevali Çori exists beneath the waters of the Euphrates, preserved only through archaeological records and recovered artifacts. The stones, carvings, and structures discovered before the flooding provide a glimpse into a world that existed at the very beginning of settled human life. Was Nevali Çori a religious center, a gathering place, or something whose purpose has been lost entirely with the people who built it? As researchers continue studying the surviving evidence, this ancient settlement remains one of the most important reminders that the earliest chapters of human history still contain unanswered questions waiting to be explored. Yet the significance of Nevali Çori becomes even clearer when the settlement is placed within the broader landscape of Upper Mesopotamia. This was not an isolated experiment occurring in a single valley. It belonged to a period of rapid cultural transformation, when communities were beginning to develop new ways of organizing space, sharing resources, and expressing collective identity. The surrounding landscape would have looked very different from the archaeological remains visible today. The Euphrates was not yet confined by modern engineering projects, and the hills and valleys supported communities that depended upon a mixture of hunting, gathering, cultivation, and animal management. Rivers provided water, while surrounding uplands offered access to wild plants, timber, and game. Within this environment, settlements such as Nevali Çori could become places where people gathered for purposes that extended beyond survival. The communal buildings are especially important because they suggest that architecture itself had become a means of expressing social relationships. Constructing a large shared structure requires more than technical knowledge. It requires coordination. People must agree on where it should stand, gather the necessary materials, assign labor, and maintain the structure after its completion. That process may have strengthened the community itself. In this sense, the buildings at Nevali Çori may represent more than early architecture. They could reflect the emergence of new social identities, where people increasingly understood themselves as members of a collective rather than simply as separate families or mobile groups. The carved pillars provide another clue. Their surfaces were not left untouched. Human hands deliberately shaped them, giving otherwise ordinary limestone forms recognizable features and symbolic imagery. This investment of time suggests that appearance mattered. The builders were communicating something, even if the meaning of those images can no longer be recovered with certainty. Perhaps the symbols represented stories shared by the community. Perhaps they marked particular rituals or social groups. They may have represented animals associated with particular beliefs, or they may have served purposes that modern observers cannot easily recognize. There is no surviving written explanation. That silence creates a boundary that archaeology cannot simply cross. Researchers can compare the carvings with those found at neighboring sites, study their placement, and examine the buildings around them. But interpretation remains dependent upon patterns rather than direct testimony. Even so, the patterns are revealing. The repeated appearance of T-shaped pillars and communal structures across several sites in the region suggests that these ideas were not isolated. Communities were participating in a broader cultural tradition, exchanging concepts and perhaps moving between settlements. This raises the possibility that Nevali Çori was part of a much larger network. People may have traveled through the region carrying materials, technologies, stories, and religious traditions. The similarities between distant settlements could therefore reflect long-term contact rather than independent development. Jade, metal, writing, and monumental architecture would come much later. At Nevali Çori, the foundations of complexity were being expressed through simpler materials: limestone, bone, clay, wood, and human labor. Yet, simple materials do not necessarily indicate simple ideas. The people who lived here understood their environment well enough to select suitable stone, construct durable buildings, organize shared spaces, and produce sophisticated symbolic art. Their technology may have been limited compared with later civilizations, but their ability to cooperate was already considerable. Perhaps this is why Nevali Çori remains so important. It complicates the familiar story of civilization as a straight progression. Human societies did not simply move from wandering to farming, then from villages to cities, following a single predetermined path. Different communities experimented with different forms of settlement and social organization, sometimes abandoning them and sometimes carrying them forward. Nevali Çori represents one moment within that much larger process. Its eventual abandonment does not necessarily mean failure. Communities relocate for countless reasons. Rivers change course, resources shift, populations move, traditions evolve, and new centers become more attractive. A settlement can disappear from active use without losing its importance to the people who once lived there. From the submerged remains of Nevali Çori, where early communities carved symbols into stone and created communal spaces before the rise of cities, our journey now moves westward to another extraordinary landscape, shaped by the relationship between humans and rock. Here, entire valleys appear transformed by nature. Yet, within the stone itself are traces of human hands that carved homes, places of worship, and hidden chambers into the earth. In the heart of Cappadocia, central Turkey, rises one of the most unusual landscapes on the planet. Towering formations of soft volcanic rock stand across the valleys around Göreme, creating a scene filled with towering pillars, narrow passages, and cone-shaped structures often called fairy chimneys. At first glance, these formations appear to be the result of natural forces alone, but within these rocks are thousands of rooms, tunnels, and architectural spaces created by generations of human inhabitants. Known as the Göreme rock structures, this landscape represents one of the most fascinating examples of human adaptation to a challenging environment. Carved over centuries into volcanic stone, these spaces served as homes, storage areas, religious centers, and places of refuge. Yet, the full story of how and why people transformed this landscape remains a subject of continued research. The foundation of Cappadocia's unusual appearance was created millions of years ago through volcanic activity. Ancient eruptions covered the region with layers of ash that hardened into a soft rock called tuff. Over time, wind, rain, and temperature changes gradually shaped the landscape, leaving behind towering formations surrounded by valleys and cliffs. This natural process created the perfect material for human modification. Unlike harder stone, volcanic tuff could be carved using relatively simple tools. Communities discovered that these formations provided natural insulation, remaining cool during hot summers and warmer during colder months. As a result, people began expanding natural cavities and creating artificial chambers within the rock. But the scale of these structures raises deeper questions. Why did communities invest so much effort into transforming entire valleys into complex networks of living spaces? The earliest evidence of human activity in Cappadocia stretches back thousands of years, but many of the most recognizable structures developed during the Byzantine period, particularly between the 4th and 13th centuries A.D. During this time, the region became an important center for Christian communities, many of whom carved churches, monasteries, and religious complexes into the rock. The Göreme Open-Air Museum provides some of the most famous examples. Inside these carved spaces are preserved wall paintings depicting biblical scenes and religious figures, revealing the artistic traditions of the communities that lived there. Yet, the landscape extends far beyond these well-known monuments. Throughout the valleys surrounding Göreme are countless hidden chambers, interconnected rooms, and carved passages. Some structures appear to have been designed for everyday life, containing kitchens, storage areas, and sleeping spaces. Others served religious purposes, with features such as apses, prayer spaces, and decorated interiors. The relationship between ordinary life and spiritual practice appears deeply connected within Cappadocia's rock architecture. The natural landscape itself became part of the architecture. Instead of building structures on top of the land, communities shaped the land into structures. The boundary between nature and human creation became almost impossible to separate. This raises an important question. Were these rock settlements simply practical solutions to environmental challenges, or did the landscape hold deeper cultural significance? Some researchers believe that the unusual formations of Cappadocia influenced how inhabitants understood their surroundings. The towering rocks may have been viewed not only as useful materials but also as meaningful features of the environment. Natural spaces often played important roles in the beliefs of ancient societies, and Cappadocia's dramatic landscape may have shaped the spiritual imagination of those who lived there. Another fascinating aspect of the region is its connection to underground settlements. Nearby areas contain enormous underground complexes such as Derinkuyu and Kaymaklu, where communities created multiple levels beneath the surface. These sites include living areas, storage rooms, ventilation systems, and passages designed to support large groups of people for extended periods. The exact reasons for constructing these underground cities remain debated. The most common explanation is defense. During periods of conflict, underground spaces could provide protection from invading forces. The ability to hide communities, supplies, and livestock below ground would have offered a significant advantage. However, researchers continue studying how these complexes developed and how frequently they were used. Some may have functioned as temporary shelters rather than permanent underground cities. Their construction likely occurred gradually, with different generations expanding and modifying existing spaces. The mystery of Gurame is not that humans could carve stone, but that they created such a sophisticated relationship with their environment. The rock structures demonstrate engineering knowledge, artistic ability, and social organization. They reveal communities capable of planning complex spaces and adapting to changing circumstances over centuries. Some more speculative interpretations have suggested that Cappadocia's rock settlements contain evidence of forgotten technologies or purposes beyond what archaeology currently recognizes. While these ideas capture public imagination, researchers generally focus on the remarkable achievements of known historical communities who built these structures using available resources and ingenuity. The true wonder of Gurame may be found in the achievements of ordinary people. Without modern machinery, they transformed volcanic cliffs into places where families lived, communities gathered, and traditions were preserved. They shaped the landscape not through domination, but through cooperation with the natural materials around them. Today, the valleys of Gurame remain filled with silent stone towers and carved chambers that continue to reveal new information about the people who created them. Every passage and room reflects a decision made by someone centuries ago, a choice about survival, belief, and connection to place. Were these rock structures created only as practical shelters, or did the landscape itself become part of a larger cultural and spiritual vision? As archaeologists continue exploring Cappadocia's carved valleys, the stones of Gurame remain a lasting reminder that some of humanity's greatest achievements are not built above the earth, but shaped directly from it. Yet the story of Cappadocia does not end with the chambers that can still be entered today. Beyond the familiar paths and preserved churches lies a much larger archaeological landscape, one in which generations repeatedly altered the same cliffs, sometimes expanding spaces that had already existed for centuries. Each new community inherited a landscape that was already marked by human activity, then added another layer of its own. This process makes Cappadocia particularly difficult to interpret. A room carved into volcanic rock may have served one purpose when it was first created, and an entirely different purpose generations later. A small chamber could have begun as a storage space, been converted into a living area, and eventually become part of a religious complex. Walls could be reshaped, entrances sealed, and passages redirected. The result is an archaeological record in which different periods overlap within the same stone. Even the apparent simplicity of a carved room can therefore conceal a complicated history. The underground settlements provide an especially striking example. Their narrow corridors and carefully engineered ventilation shafts suggest that the builders understood how to move air through spaces buried deep beneath the surface. Stone doors could be rolled into position to restrict access, while interconnected chambers allowed inhabitants to move between different sections of the settlement. These features have often been presented as evidence of sophisticated defensive planning, and there is good reason for that interpretation. Cappadocia experienced periods of political instability and warfare, and underground shelters could provide temporary protection from raiding groups. Yet, the presence of defensive features does not necessarily mean that every underground chamber was built during a single period of conflict. Some may have developed slowly, responding to changing needs. This possibility changes the way the entire landscape can be understood. Cappadocia may not have been created according to one grand design. Instead, it may represent thousands of individual decisions made over centuries, each generation responding to its own circumstances while modifying what earlier inhabitants had left behind. There is also the question of scale. How many people once lived among these carved valleys? Archaeological evidence suggests that Cappadocia supported substantial communities, but estimating population is difficult. Rooms could have been occupied seasonally, temporarily, or by small groups rather than continuously. Some spaces may have belonged to monasteries, while others served agricultural or domestic functions. The landscape was not simply inhabited, it was organized. Wine presses, ovens, storage rooms, animal shelters, wells, and agricultural spaces demonstrate that these communities developed systems for producing and preserving food within the same environment. The volcanic terrain that initially appears harsh and inhospitable could therefore become a highly functional settlement landscape. And perhaps this is where the real significance of Gurame begins to emerge. The people of Cappadocia did not merely seek shelter from nature. They learned to use geological forces to their advantage. The same volcanic processes that created the soft rock also created soils capable of supporting agriculture in selected areas. Valleys provided water and fertile ground, while the rock formations offered shelter and building material. Nature had created the raw architecture. Human beings completed it. Yet, the spiritual dimension remains impossible to ignore. The churches carved into the cliffs contain paintings that preserve scenes of Christian theology, but the spaces themselves may have carried significance beyond their decoration. Darkness, silence, isolation, and controlled entrances could create an atmosphere entirely different from ordinary life outside. For those entering these places centuries ago, the transition from bright sunlight into a carved chamber may have been a deliberate psychological experience. Whether this was consciously intended cannot always be proven. That uncertainty is part of what makes Cappadocia so compelling. Archaeology can reveal where people lived, what they built, what they ate, and sometimes when they occupied a space. It is far more difficult to reconstruct what they felt when they entered it. The cliffs, therefore, preserve two histories at once. One is visible in the architecture. Rooms, stairways, churches, storage chambers, and tunnels. The other survives only indirectly in the choices behind those structures. Why was one chamber placed here and another deeper inside the rock? Why were certain spaces decorated while others were left plain? Why were some entrances enlarged while others were carefully concealed? Each answer depends upon evidence, and where evidence ends, interpretation begins.